morning, and thanks for joining us for our presentation today. We'll be presenting how to sell solar plus storage, brought to you by AEE Solar. Before we begin, and while everyone's logging on, if you are experiencing any technical difficulties, if you're not sure you're seeing the right screen or you can't hear me very well, if you look to the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see your control panels from GoToWebinar. There's a questions box there on that control panel, and that's where you can type in any questions, comments, or notes, and that'll come right to me so we can take care of those before we get started. Also, just a couple of quick notes. We will have our Q&A session following the presentation, so you're welcome to submit your questions at any point during the webinar, and that'll be through that questions box, and we'll do our best to answer as many as possible after the presentation. There will also be a brief survey that will pop up in a new window once you exit the webinar. I think it's just a couple of questions, should take only 5 minutes top. And if you complete that, we'll send you a copy of these slides later today. We just like to get your feedback on these and any suggestions for future topics. All right, looks like we've got a lot of folks joining on. So I'll introduce our presenter today. We have Josh Brister, AEE Solar Senior Manager of Product Management and Technical Sales. Josh, I'll pass it over to you.
Excellent. All right. Thanks, Hannah. Thanks, everybody out there around the country tuning in. Recognize it's a Friday before a holiday weekend, and there's probably other places you guys would like to be. So appreciate you guys being here with us. And yeah, this is one of my I think one of my favorite topics to talk about through the year as we do our webinar series, because it gets me a little bit removed from the technical, and a lot of marketing frameworks and stuff we talked through today, which is or was a foundation of how I got to this job, is through the marketing and then rollout side of things. So and it's a topic, it's solar plus storage, right? So always something to talk about there. So a couple disclaimers, not starting with agenda, but starting with disclaimers. Always a good solid foundation for a webinar. Make no mistake, this is very, very tough getting this stuff right. And I say that not condescendingly because we figured it out. We haven't. This is very tough, and it forces you to get in the minds of your customer and think really critically about your own business and how you position it. And it's all very relative to your market. So, don't feel bad if you feel like you haven't nailed the marketing mix for this solution in your market. Second disclaimer, I'm not going to be covering a lot of product specifics, designs, chemistries, etc. We do that pretty much the other 11 or 12 webinars a year. Always happy to talk about that stuff. Got a full team of people that will talk solar plus storage till you're blue in the face. So feel free to reach out to us there for that kind of knowledge. No silver bullets here on kind of how do you put together the right messaging and then watch the sales pile up. But we know the combination of the market size and the profitability on some of these jobs is going to be well worth it. And we see that this is where the market's going. This week from the last 2 weeks here in Northern California, we're getting messaging now from PG&E that, and I forget the acronym, but there's basically going to be rolling blackouts through their service territory as they look at high fire risk and specifically high prevailing winds. They will be selectively islanding certain transmission lines, which is going to put whole neighborhoods and areas off the grid. Perfect opportunity to, perfect opportunity to sell solar plus storage into those markets where people are going to have forced outages to deal with this summer. Yeah, just one little timely piece of news there on that. We're also seeing, perhaps non-coincidentally, PG&E have some huge marketing campaigns to talk about vehicle electrification and other feel-good programs because they know this is really tough news to palate for most people in those affected territories. So what are we going to go through? talk a little bit about what's different about selling storage, why this can be so challenging vis-a-vis the traditional solar sales process. Walk through a few marketing frameworks, talk about, positioning of your solution and your value proposition. Topic that's near and dear to my heart is benefits versus features. Kind of how do you make it matter to the customer? As I like to say, no talk on solar plus storage is complete without talking about value stacking, and then avoiding the data trap. So how do you stay on kind of the how do you stay on the warm side of the topic without the nitty-gritty details? So what is different about selling solar plus storage? Let's think about selling your typical grid-tied system. Your sizing. I think we're all familiar with these rules of thumb or these heuristics here. How do we size the system? Well, we might start first by asking what all is going to fit. Then we might start by asking how much are you trying to offset, and then what's affordable. How do you balance the the dollars per watt and the overall dollars. But generally speaking, we're really comfortable with how that sizing works. Competition in the grid-tied space. It's a lot of companies out there who are in this space and sell competitively. It's very, very value driven. But for the most part, you're dealing with people that have really similar capabilities. Pricing, it's simplified. It's down to the dollars per watt in a lot of instances. And, in a lot of the really hot markets, people know the going rates for storage better than they would know the going rates for, paint or new lawns or you name it. So what's different about storage? How do you size it? Well, you've got to ask yourself a lot of questions before you get into the sizing. Is it daily cycling? Are you targeting a backup or a self-consumption application? Do you need to do a load study to figure out what exactly is being backed up? Is there a generator to interconnect? All of those things. Is it a retrofit versus a new system? Competition. So, you've got all of those companies selling grid-tied solar. You've got the Tesla direct model. And I say direct there in air quotes because now it's gotten even more direct, basically online only. You've got legacy off-grid and grid-tied battery backup installers in your areas that, are seeing their volumes increase for these solutions. You're seeing, you've got DIY and do-it-for-me e-retailers. There's a wealth of information on YouTube for people to try and figure this out for themselves. Some of it, let's put it this way, try to steer clear of the build your own power wall solution. And what I mean by that is you see people take, strings of lithium, 3-volt cells and run parallel series strings to get up to a large battery. It's pretty scary stuff when you think about it. Pricing is more complicated. Again, you're going to go back to how's it being designed. Is backup included? How much are you cycling it? Now you're talking about balancing dollars per kilowatt hour and dollars per kilowatt. So overall, it's more complicated. It's more expensive. It's much more difficult to explain. It's hard to cut through that noise, if you will, that's out there in the market. I wanted to talk about technical adoption or technological adoption and this theory of crossing a chasm. If you think about a product as it's adopted from first launch to its end of life or a full product life cycle, this author Jeffrey Moore came up with this framework for thinking about when certain types of people adopt a new product. We see at the leading edge, we've called these categories innovators and early adopters. So these are your first entrants. These are going to be people who helped innovate the solution themselves, or have to have the latest and greatest. Generally very hip, well, maybe not hip, but very technically minded. Eager consumers. What we see then is, eventually you'll see the product get picked up by an early majority. Trendsetters, mavens, things like that. A late majority, so call it a bandwagon. Laggards will be the people who only added Facebook to their repertoire in the late teen years, who eventually got on board, and now we see that's phasing out and it's on its way out. So on the left, you see, okay, in theory, this is a standard distribution bell curve. I get people on board, and then obviously people will come on, I'll have an early majority pick the product up later in the life cycle. Obviously, it'll get adopted. What Jeffrey Moore posited was that it's not obvious. It's there's actually a big gap there. Use my mouse here to point this out. That speaking from a time frame, there's a lot of products that either never get past this early adopter segment and quickly get forgotten, or there's an inordinate amount of time between when early adopters pick up a product and when the early majority picks it up. The point there being that it's the work of the marketers and the salespeople to transition from the early adopters to the early majority, and it's not easy, and you need to think about some of the reasons why it's not being adopted. So I say all that to say this: think about where we are in the adoption curve in your markets for grid-tied solar. Here in Northern California, we're either the early majority or the late majority, depending upon what you think the ultimate kind of end state is for solar penetration. I would tend to say we're probably, we're somewhere probably halfway up the early majority. Again, depending on your market and what utility district you're in. Ask yourself that same question for solar plus storage. I would say here in Northern California, we're probably one of the 3 leading markets for this. We're still very much in the early adopters phase. We haven't gotten early majority traction really in any markets besides probably Hawaii and San Diego. So when you think about it that way, think about, how prominent is this solution? How many people really know about it? How many of your average, and to be honest here, of your average homeowners understand what it is and what it does? And you've got to sell and market accordingly in your market. You can't, I think one of the easy logical fallacies of any industry really is thinking, oh, I've known about this product. I've been hearing about it for 3 years. Obviously my customers do too, right? I just have to bring it up to them and they'll have interest. Probably not the case. This is a really interesting framework for understanding why solutions are different and trying to really qualify the dimensions on which they're different. So let me just run through, with these categories, kind of what they mean. And then we can talk about how we would evaluate solar plus storage from this framework. Relative advantage, pretty straightforward. Is it relatively and objectively better than what it replaces? The next dimension here would be compatibility. Does it fit with existing systems, standards, needs? Is it going to play nicely with the other, in our case, devices or infrastructure in a home? Complexity, is it difficult to implement or understand? How much time do you have to spend really explaining what it is to a consumer and end user? Observability, and this one's, probably not as straightforward as we would think in solar. How apparent or obvious is the adoption? With grid-tied solar, I'd say somewhat to vary. It goes on your roof. People can see it as they drive by your house. That, hey, that house has gone solar. Interesting. You're not going to see that with solar plus storage. It's going to look like every other grid-tied system, until you get into the garage or on the side of the house and you actually see, oh, this looks more complex. What's different here? Trialability. How easily can it be tested or tried? Is it is it something where you can mail someone a sample of your perfume or peanut butter, and they can try it out themselves with very little risk? Obviously not the case with solar plus storage. So when we walk through these, let's talk specifically. Solar plus storage, is it better than what it replaces? Well, in some instances, yeah, very much so. If you're adding backup to a system in an environment where you've got outages or an unreliable grid, yeah, hands down, better than what it replaces. You've got flexibility, you've got backup, you've got resiliency. Compatibility, is it compatible with existing systems, standards, needs? Is solar plus storage compatible? Yeah, for the most part. I'd say that wiggle room on my end is me thinking about wiring up backup panels and loads panels and possibly having to do a service upgrade, depending upon kind of where you are in your panel, how many spaces you've got, how much backfeed you've got kind of available to work with. But yes, you're not going to have different appliances because you added storage to your system. You're not going to need a new house or, not be able to run TVs and things. Complex, just say yes. Yeah, difficult to implement, size, and difficult for, I think, homeowners to understand. Observability, very low, really. Until, let's put it this way. I've been in this industry for 7+ years now, and I've seen a handful of homes that were not customers or colleagues that have solar plus storage. Trialability, can it be tested or tried? Not hands-on. I think the best that companies have done here is make some really cool infographics and videos and things, but it's not something you're going to bring home. You're not going to do a 30-day trial and then get your money back and have the installer take the equipment down. So when you look through all of these different lenses, this is a pretty big jump to go even from a grid-tied solar system to solar plus storage. It's quite a bit different, and there's quite a bit of coaching that has to get done to make all of these things understood and relevant and I won't say tangible, but concrete for the homeowner. So what can we do about it? We've talked about, why solar plus storage is different. We talked about, why we're on a different place in the adoption curve. We talked about why it's fundamentally different and what some of the dimensions on which it's different. So what can we do about it? How can we change our sales tactics, our marketing mix, how we position the product? How can we change those levers to try to get more adoption, make more sales, make more profitable sales, and ultimately grow the business? So, knowing your markets. This is going to seem, there's a lot of things we're going to talk about, and you're going to say, well, of course, duh. I have to know my market. Just don't take that for granted. Solar is like real estate: location, location, location. I live in a city served by SMUD, by the local municipal utility district here, and 3 miles kind of further up the hill is a town that's served by PG&E. The adoption rates for solar are orders of magnitude different between my city and the town up the hill served by PG&E. Knowing the AHJ, knowing the tariffs and the programs pushed by the utilities, knowing the demographics of the people in those neighborhoods is very important as well. So, without question, you got to be an expert on rates and tariffs. That's not really different from selling grid-tied solar. You've got to know where the really expensive power is, where the limiting factors on interconnection, net metering, et cetera, are. You've also got to know about things like demand charges, know about things like time of use rates, how all of these things are going to impact, the payoff and the pain associated, the payoff of implementing and the pain associated with not implementing solar plus storage. There's lots of good modeling tools out there for understanding that. I think the best one that we've used is Energy Toolbase, where you can go through and model different systems, sure, but you can also go through and model the same system under different utility tariffs. You can look at, hey, does the viability of this improve if the customer opts into this TRU rate or this scenario? So very powerful stuff. I threw up here a diagram of an analysis called PESTLE. So this is just a framework for asking intelligent questions about, your market or, your industry, really. The acronym here being political, economic, social, technological, environmental, legal. So, 6 different facets to which to look at your market. And maybe your market's homogenous, everything in your territories is similar because you're in the same utility district and same general regulations, et cetera. But even somewhere like the Sacramento area, we're going to have pockets that are much friendlier, much easier to implement than other areas because of AHJs or socioeconomic factors of our customers, legal impacts, etc. So that's knowing your, kind of the concrete objective side. Also think about, what factors or concepts are likely to move the customer. And here I think about, this is more the warm side of marketing, the behavioral, I think we've used the term before, psychographic. So how do people respond to certain things? Kind of the feel good, on one hand, the fear, uncertainty, doubt. On the other hand, what can you dangle behaviorally that will make them feel good about this decision? So a couple of things here. Shiny objects. There's people out there, and at times I've been one of them, that they have to have the next big shiny object, the next big consumer appliance, etc. There's also subsets of people out there that are going to respond to messaging like grid defection, like independence, liberty from the utility. Those things are going to speak to other subsets of your population. I say all that to say this. This tool from Claritas called Prism is a really powerful tool for really fine-tuning your marketing in a certain area. So what they've developed here is a behavioral segmentation tool. So Claritas is a marketing research firm. They aggregate a ton of data to really try to understand and model what types of people live in certain areas, down to the zip code, basically. So I've got here an example of, this is the town where I went to college. This is, I believe, 93405, zip code out of, on one side of San Luis Obispo. And so Claritas aggregates all this information. They tie it to zip codes. Then they run this huge regression analysis to try to look at, how do they pool types of people that live in these zip codes, and how do they kind of classify and quantify them. They then look at all of that hard data, and they build behavioral segmentation or personas for these. So this example here in San Luis Obispo, they built 5 personas for people in this area, upward bound, so upscale younger family mix, and they always have really interesting names for these. Country squire, so these are wealthy middle-aged family mix. Striving selfies, low income, middle age, mostly without kids. For each one of these, when you pay for the service and you dig into this, they will put qualitative data to this. So what they'll say is upward bound. These are people that are typically this age bracket, that drive these types of cars, that read these types of magazines, and trend this way politically. So this can be a really powerful tool, even just for your normal marketing mix, to understand, within a zip code, which are the people that are going to be more receptive to my messaging. So thinking about solar, you're going to want to go for, your deep greens, probably your, on the other end of the political spectrum, your more conservative folks that are maybe of a, like a sophisticated globalist kind of political representation. You can also target people who have children in the home versus out of the home. Really kind of fine tuning what people to go after in a specific zip code, and even in your regions, which zip codes make sense to market to through Facebook or ad buys or paid search. Really kind of fine tuning. I'll use the Sacramento area for an example. I want to go after people in Roseville and El Dorado Hills. I don't care to market to people in Folsom because that's SMUD and their power is so cheap I can't be competitive. But between what you know about the market from the AHJ and utility perspective, layer this in, see what you can find out about your target markets in terms of demographics and qualifications, and really fine tune where you're spending money on, broadcasting, paid search, email marketing, door knocking, etc. Really powerful stuff here. I say all that. I don't know what Claritas charges. If you've gone down this route and you've found out it's an arm and a leg, let me know and I'll adjust the slides moving forward. But I think this is a great tool to have in your toolbox to really, if you do nothing with solar plus storage, think about this for the rest of your business and how do you optimize your marketing mix even just for grid-tied solar. good stuff there. Value stacking. So we talked a little bit about applications, and I think, besides the top two markets in the US, which are Hawaii and San Diego, where the combination of high cost of energy, of high deltas between peak and off peak, and really, in Hawaii's case, the lack of a net metering option. Besides those two markets, there's going to be very few where, the economics of storage really pencil out on their own. And what I mean by that is without a backup application in most cases, without getting to, some kind of psychological impetus for solar plus storage. So the shiny object, the grid defection scenario, the I'm preparing to island my home long term. I want to be completely self-sufficient. Without those kind of behavioral drivers, you're really not going to pencil out on self-consumption alone, or maximizing your TOU. You're typically going to have to introduce some kind of energy security backup angle to it, either through critical power, through inclement weather, talking about preppers and doomsday scenarios. I think most people that have done this well have also introduced some kind of security around rates and knowing how much your power will cost. We've seen that done successfully even just with net metered solar, that you know exactly what it's going to cost you to generate from your system. You don't know how much more your utility is going to charge in year 3 or 4 or 5. So all of these values, I use to stack them up as you stack time of use, arbitrage, as you stack backup, as you stack future proofing. You get to a stack of benefits that now is greater than the cost of implementing this. You've kind of layered in benefits to help offset, or to offset the total overall cost of storage, which, as we know, is higher than solar alone. So that gets us to features versus benefits. I had a real, I guess, call it epiphany moment when I was going through this presentation at our dealer conference in January, and I'll tell you later where this epiphany happened. But features versus benefits is one of those things. It's kind of like, for me, it's like jogging. And what I mean by that is, I'll get back in the habit of running. I'll run a couple times in a week, and then I'll run a couple weeks in a row, and I'll start to feel really good about myself. And then for some reason I stop, and then it takes me a while to remember to get back in the groove again. This is something that as I review these slides, I kind of recall all the instances over the past few weeks that I fell into this trap, that I lost perspective on what was a benefit and what was not, and what was just basically data sheet marketing. Hey, this has a higher ISC. Okay, is that going to make customers happier? Is that going to get more solar installed for less money? Maybe. It depends. I mean, a benefit essentially answers the question, what's in it for me? Why is this objectively better? Why will I be happier long term? A feature is something you put on your data sheet. It's a factual statement about the product or service. And I say factual, some of these are, I guess, there's always data sheets out there that are not factual, but it's something concrete, objective, usually, about the product or service. For me, the rule of thumb here is, if you can ask the obvious question, so what, and not have a great answer to it, that's a feature. There's probably no benefit in there. So using this LG example, and I've got to update because we've got new part numbers on the LG here. LG static load rating of 125 pounds per square foot. I would say 9 out of 10 homeowners are going to look at that and say, I guess that's good. Like, I'll look up that number on these other data sheets, and I guess this one's higher. What does that mean? We've got to put that in terms that will demonstrate value for homeowners. Why should you care about that? Well, LG modules have high snow wind load ratings, which means you can install this product confidently in areas with higher snow and higher wind loading, and your modules won't collapse. They will be more secure longer over the life of your home. Oh, okay. That that I can understand. That puts it back in the perspective of a homeowner. And I say here, I have here a little piece of clip art, great example from when the iPods were launched. You were seeing MP3 players that were marketed with, hey, this one has 256 megabytes, and this one has, 500 megabytes. And it was a numbers race. Apple was the first, maybe not the first, but I believe the first to really hone in on, hey, this is what this means in terms of songs. Oh, 1,000 songs in my pocket. Okay, that's something I can wrap my head around. That's concrete for me. That's why, they won the portable MP3 player market, as long as that lasted. So takeaway here, don't get caught in the feature trap. Know where you are in the cycle. And I imagine your best salespeople have already gotten this. But it's something as we build out materials and messaging on Solar Plus Storage, let's not get lost in the KWH or the round trip efficiency. Let's talk about putting things in terms that homeowners will obviously connect with and that will resound with homeowners. Positioning. So positioning your offers, and what I mean here by offers is, I think, the energy Sage data backs this up, but most of you guys out there who are installing have, usually not one inverter line, but, 2 or 3, and they've got options to pull from based on, sizing and things, but they've also been able to develop a good offer, or maybe a better offer, or a really cost-effective module, and maybe something that's more of a premium. I wanted to talk about 2 versus 3. So there's a reason. It's kind of, it may seem antiquated, it may seem gimmicky, but good, better, best has historically worked in almost every market. There's a reason that so many companies have gravitated towards that 3-tiered approach. The data I read on this came from, I'm going to forget, one of the small appliance manufacturers. And if I recall correctly, they had, they had a 2-tiered approach in the market where they had a really feature light, I think it was a microwave, a really feature light microwave that was basically just a knob and kind of one position. They had a really feature rich that was programmable and a little complex. And they basically had the 2, and they sold a ton of the value oriented microwave, and not very much of the high end one, but the high end one had good margins, so they were pretty happy with that. And they did an A/B test. Basically, an A/B test means you try to control for variables, but you run one set of messaging or one product, and in a similar market you run something different and you compare the 2. And if you were doing this really objectively and scientifically, you would probably do at least 2 cases of A and at least 2 cases of B, and you would try to look at objectively how did A perform versus B and vice versa. So basically what they went with was, well, hey, let's get really crazy. Let's have a 3rd microwave that's kind of in the middle, and let's see if we'll test if the proportions we get on A, B, C are different than they were with A and B. And what they found was, yes, a 3-tiered strategy almost always led to better overall selling points and margins than a 2-tier strategy. Why is that? Well, they went through all kinds of things. And then they came back to a couple things, which is if you've got 3, you're creating a midpoint that kind of becomes a frame of reference. And what these particular researchers found was that when you give people an option of 3, a lot of people will feel self-conscious picking the cheapest option. It will inherently ground people and orient them towards that middle tier option. When you have 2, it becomes a lot easier to justify, the value-oriented product, because you're avoiding, the overpriced premium option. You feel good that you're being economical. It's harder to feel good about taking the cheaper out of 3 than it is the cheaper out of 2. Excuse me. The other thing they found is that customers this applies to almost everything I've looked at. Customers have a tendency to buy emotionally, buy on feel and emotion, and then try to justify rationally. I'm guilty of this almost every day. I'm going to get a cup of coffee on my way to work. Well, I'm going to get a scone too because I've got a long day ahead of me and I've worked a lot this week, or I've got traffic or whatever. I felt like buying a scone. I bought a scone, and then I tried to justify it after the fact. This applies to all types of consumer goods. This applies to B2B, I would posit as well. So again, buying emotionally, justifying rationally. I think the folks that do, really high touch marketing the best have done this, and they'll lead with messaging that's more kind of emotional or qualitative, and then they'll give you enough of the data to be able to justify it after you've made the decision. So, pragmatic example on the 3-tiered approach. How I thought when I put this presentation together. Okay, three easy tiers of solar plus storage that fit obviously different price points, but different application sets or values. Think about your secure power supply from SMA. 2,000 watts on one receptacle. Okay, I can think about how many amps that is. All right. Storage. Storage plus LG Chem, really the high volume solution out there. You're going to get in backup mode on all of these, of course. 5 kVA, so 5,000 watts on 2 to 3 circuits. Okay, I can think about what that is. Think about a radian. 8,000 watts continuous, 12,000 watt surge on 4 to 5 circuits. Like, oh, okay, that's a lot more power. Think about how a 3-tiered approach here kind of gets you thinking just inherently on that middle grade option. If we were to do this as a 2-tiered strategy, we would either have the secure power supply and the radian, or maybe the secure power supply and the storage. Think about where you would gravitate towards with a 2-tier option. Now, this was my example of getting caught in the feature trap, where I spent 3 minutes talking about different levels or tiers of solar plus storage. This is all feature-based. We talked about watts, we talked about kVA, we talked about number of circuits. This is a concrete example, and I've left it in here on purpose to show that this would have been a great opportunity to talk about practically what can I back up with secure power supply. I'm backing up a laptop, or maybe a small, mini cube refrigerator. Storage, like I'm backing up a kitchen and an office, or I'm backing up the medical equipment in grandma's room, or you have it. Radiant, I'm backing up half of my house and probably a small air conditioner. That's a great example of getting into benefits, and I didn't get very far down this path. If I had, I would have talked more about, what are you doing with what you're backing up? Refrigeration for food that's not going to go sour because your refrigerator was off for 8 hours. Having lights on to put the kids to bed and not have to run around and create fire hazards with candles. Those are the kinds of things that if you're taking this all the way through, you'd be talking about those kind of, hitting the heart or the spirit of a customer rather than just, the left side of their brain. Marketing as sales support. So, most of what we talked about has been kind of what goes into your messaging. Let's talk a little bit about what your messaging goes on to. Think about your customer journey. So, don't think about marketing as just getting the phone to ring. Think about marketing as helping get that customer all the way through your sales cycle. So I've got here at the tail end an example of a value stream mapping, or a customer experience journey that can help you, with the aid of lots of Post-it notes, can help you kind of put a map together of how a customer gets from, first impression all the way through, signed contract number 1 or signed contract number 2 or referral, or kind of you name the endpoint. But walk through your customer journey and think about, does your collateral match the steps? Do I have something that's already in front of the customer, or that I can get to them easily that will help get them to the next step in their journey? Does it positively reflect on your company and instill confidence? Obviously, if you don't feel confident in your collateral, your salespeople won't. If they're not confident, it's probably not going to resound with the customer. more importantly here, 1 and 2, does what I have match what people need to get them moving? When I think about this one, this part of the discussion, I think about, for some reason, I think about ordering food online because I've done it a lot the last couple of months. When you go to someone's website or their Yelp page, do they have what I need to be able to call in and make an order or have an order delivered, et cetera? Like, does the menu actually match what they offer? Is it in a format that I can easily read on a phone? Does it get me prepared to call and place an order or go in and pick it up? So for us, what does this collateral mean? Is it something they can find easily that makes it really easy to call and have someone, do a sit down with me? Does it help me understand in 30 seconds what it is you do and whether that fits what I need or not? Do you have documentation that helps me get from, hey, that's interesting, to, hey, when can I get this done? So here's an example of documentation that helps get customers from one step in the process to the next. This is a document that Sunrun put out for their Brightbox solution, which is SolarEdge plus LG Chem for self-consumption and backup. What this document is this is something that's prepping the homeowner for, I believe that this is the document to prep a homeowner for that last site survey before kind of final design. This is where the customers got to go through, do their own homework, and figure out what do they really want to back up. What breakers go to which loads, what breakers are the most important to back up, how do we get them labeled so that when the install crew comes out, it's a day-and-a-half install and not 3 hours with the homeowner figuring out, oh, this breaker has, this set of receptacles and these lights, but not that. So prep work for the customer to do to get them moving forward in the cycle. It's not, so this is not something that's going to win, a marketing prize. It's effective. It's really targeted to a specific step in the process and helping the customer get to the next step, which is, successful site installation. And really, this targets a step in the process that I think Sunrun had identified as a source of, not total customer satisfaction, which was at install, having to know what to back up and, sometimes not getting it right. And I say not getting it right by customer thought they were getting this, and it turns out these were actually backed up instead. Or customer thought they'd be able to back up the whole home, and, at the time of installation, they found out that was not the case. So prep documentation specifically targeted to get to the customer from step C to step D, for example. I'm going to jump ahead a couple. This is what I was talking about in terms of customer experience journey. So there's lots of great resources on the web for kind of free workshops on this stuff. I put this together when I was at Schneider Electric, and we were looking at kind of how do we do big proposals for people? How do we get them from, hey, I'm interested in bidding on this to, we've got a signed contract and we've got an installation schedule. So walk through from the customer's perspective every time you deal with them. If there's decisions to be made, if there's documentation that's needed, try to call out pain points. Where do you typically lose people? Try to call out points at which you really feel like you're adding value and getting the customer on board. Talk about which people you need, where there's handoffs, just really kind of walk through the whole thing, soup to nuts. And then at the end, really identify 3 to 5, hopefully no more than 3, areas of opportunity. Where can we tweak this part of the process? Where can we add documentation? Where can we equip people so that they're better able, not get stuck at spots, not, kind of tune out and give up. How do you keep people moving through, and how do you make them happy while you're doing it? If you do that part, you'll have really good documentation, and, it may not be the snazziest, but it'll be really effective in moving people through the stages in the funnel. Avoiding the data trap. So this is hard in any part of solar, I think, because it's just so data and kind of engineering driven. But especially when we're talking solar plus storage, and there's so many different So many different really subsets of applications, different chemistries, different architectures of AC coupled, DC coupled, high voltage DC, low voltage DC. It's really easy to get caught in this. For me, what I always come back to is in speaking with, friends and family members and, people at T-ball games, how many of those people would really understand the difference between a kilowatt and a kilowatt hour? Not many, right? Just not many people understand the fundamental difference between, a flow and a stock of something, or a rate and an amount. It's really easy to get caught up in this in solar plus storage, because now we've got, now we're talking kW and kWh. We're talking about round trips. We're talking about, how many cycles. So I gave that example earlier of three-tiered portfolio, or three-tiered positioning. I gave it all in kW and amps and volts. It's really easy to do that here. I think the people that have done this most successfully talk about solar plus storage and backup in what it will do concretely in the home. So, this system will give you extended backup for 2 to 3 circuits, usually for about 2 to 3 hours. It's going to depend on what's on those circuits, but generally that's what we're talking about: 2 to 3 circuits, 2 to 3 hours. That's something that people can really wrap their head around. And now you can also get them thinking about, okay, what's really most important? What are those circuits? How do I make, and then in a backup event, how do you make the decisions about what to keep on, what to keep off? Avoiding this data trap, specifically on which circuits to back up. If you can make that part of the process at the site survey, or even as kind of a throw-in line at your first sit down or your first phone interaction. Basically, the better you start, or the earlier you start putting things in concrete terms for homeowners, in my opinion, I think the better. Now you may see you may see more job signings and more installs if you don't do that, but you're going to have, I guarantee it, a harder process after the fact when they do have that first backup event, or when you realize that they're daily cycling plus their battery. So we'll call that avoiding the data trap. Avoiding the Tesla question. This has been here, basically, I don't know, since sometime in 2015. Your customers have heard of Powerwall. If not, they've definitely heard of Tesla. Now, what they think about that solution and what it can do, it really widely varies on, kind of their expertise or how much research they've done. There's going to be some people out there that think that and I'll nerd out for a second here, that think that the Powerwall is a tesseract, which provides unlimited power forever in the hands of the holder. There's probably some people with more realistic expectations of what a Powerwall can and can't do. The sad truth is Tesla beat a lot of us to the market in positioning this offer. And, first one there usually gets to carve out the behavioral space and what people think of the overall solution. They may or may not have realistic expectations of what a Powerwall can do. So how do you position your offer against something that most people already have strongly rooted conceptions of, but probably haven't experienced firsthand and may not ever get to, depending on where they are and which installers are signed up with Tesla, and if they can get a battery. So how do you deal with that? In my opinion, don't badmouth the competitor. It's not, it's not taking the moral high road. It almost never works out better in your favor to badmouth somebody. So I think about a couple things. I think about, flattering comparison. Hey, they make a great product. It's really solid. I think we got a great alternative. I think we can match them kind of watt for watt, and I think the overall, experience will be better. Think about you've heard people call this negging or backhanded compliments, or one way to say this would be, hey, it's a great product. Heard a lot of buzz. I haven't seen a lot installed. I hear they're having a shortage. Let me know if you hear from anybody that can do it, but I don't know. That's another way to handle it. I'd be interested in hearing from you guys in the comments or whatever, how you've dealt with this, because I don't see it going away, in that, there's still a lot of really positive buzz about the product, but it still remains pretty tight, and we see Tesla kind of scaling back and scaling back. I don't think they've changed their channel strategy, so I don't see a way forward to have a lot of these installed and out in the market. But that's not going to get back to homeowners. What's out there is this is a really great product, and why doesn't everyone have it? So be really curious to see kind of how you guys have dealt with this in your local markets. Kind of bring it back full circle. I'm a Zeppelin fan, so song remains the same. Goes back to markets being local. Successful sales revolve around relationships, around referrals, around having good people that you can trust that position your company in a good light. Do you have credibility with prospects is really what this boils down to. As much as it's all about price, it's not. In many markets, these are not economically driven decisions. People go solar because it feels right, because they feel like they're doing the right thing, and they're trying to make a difference wherever they can. And I'd ask this question: how many of the jobs you won last year were because you were the absolute rock bottom low cost? Sample size of one. I know that when we're making major decisions on things in our home or cars or trips or whatever, we usually don't go with the cheapest option. One, I think going back to that positioning, and I don't want to reinforce to myself that I am cheap. So I'll typically go with the second or the third cheapest option. Also, I believe in something called the winner's curse, which is when someone's got a rock bottom low price that beats everybody, they're either going to try to bait and switch you or upsell you, or they've misquoted it and they've missed something, and when they realize halfway through they're going to lose money on the job, you're either going to get a substandard installation or experience, or they're going to try and get more out of you after the fact. So it's not a race to the bottom on pricing. It's kind of where I'll leave that one. Complex sales require good collateral. So remember the Rogers framework about the 6 dimensions on which things are different. That's the kind of thing you got to think about when you put your collateral together for your storage offer. Is how do I make this? How do I demonstrate that there's a relative advantage? How do I make it observable? I can't really do a whole lot on trialability, but maybe I can do some really good videos of the Smith family install we did last year, and how it works, what it looks like on a home wall. Try to make it real, concrete, demonstrable. You've got to bridge that gap for homeowners there. You can't rely on them to do the proper research and figure it out for themselves. Parting thoughts: really difficult to convey the benefits of solution, much more so than conveying the benefits of products. And I would say we are all in a solutions industry here. As much as I like to think that what we do here is selling boxes, these are solutions we sell. Think about demos and sample systems. Think about having an LG Chem shell on the wall in your office if you have one, or maybe doing a job for someone that's particularly receptive to being a referral. Think about breadcrumbs. Think about aligning your messaging on grid-tied solar now to allow a retrofit in the future. We know that under current ITC, you're given a year to go back and retrofit a system with storage and still qualify for that ITC. So how do you leave the breadcrumbs in there to go back in 6 months and get the next portion of the sale? Have you done a customer map? Have you mapped this experience journey? Lots of things to ask about. And this for me, this is really good food for thought on long drives, on commutes. Is like, how do I make little incremental tweaks to my messaging, to my marketing, to try to get 5% more adoption, or get 3 more site surveys, or just incremental tweaks from the from the shoes of the homeowner to be more, to really make it concrete for them in their eyes, I guess. I'll go back to my first disclaimer. This is really tough. So it's a lot to think about. And, you got to ask some tough questions of yourselves and your team and your marketing. Are we making this clear? Are we helping get people from, first impression to closing the deal? All right. So this is one of the longer webinars I do every year. I think we've got a few minutes here for questions. I don't know if any have come in, but we'll open it up at this time.
All right, thanks, Josh. We do have 5 minutes here, so if you have any questions, feel free to send them over. Just a reminder, if you exit the webinar, that survey will pop up in a new window. And to please answer that survey, give us your feedback, tell us what you liked and didn't like, and we'll send you a copy of these slides later today. So there's a lot of good stuff in here, so you don't want to miss out. All right, well, Josh, I think you were very, very thorough. I haven't seen any questions come through yet.
I'd say either very thorough or I've just befuddled everyone to the point where they can't take it anymore. We'll go with thorough. Okay.
Yep. All right. Well, if anyone has questions, you know, they come to you after the fact, feel free to reach out to me or Josh or to our tech team at AEE Solar, and we'll be happy to answer those questions for you. Just a reminder, we do have our next webinar coming up June 28th, and that topic will be aeexpress.com, tips, tools, and insights. And you can also check out our training webpage on our website, aeesolar.com, to find out about upcoming workshops, webinars, and other events that are helpful and educational. All right, well, thanks again, Josh.
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. Happy Memorial Day to everybody out there. Stay safe, and yeah, we look forward to seeing you on AE Express.
All right, thank you again, everyone.